The Caliphate of Cordoba, Spain. In 711 AD, the Muslims invaded Spain, where they remained until they were finally defeated in 1492, nearly 800 years later. As expected, the Muslims were not welcome in Spain, yet their presence wasn't entirely bad either, as in fact many Westerners recognized. For the Muslims created a marvelous civilization based around Cordoba, the so-called Caliphate of Cordoba. By the 10th century, Cordoba counted 900 baths, with running water from aqueducts, and also paved and well-lit streets. While, in contrast, the Europeans were still barely climbing out of the early Middle Ages. The Muslims also built stunning architecture that is still counted among the most beautiful in world history. An early masterpiece includes the huge palace of Al-Rahman III, called Madinat al-Zahra, of which only the ruins still stand today. And interestingly, which included a bowl of mercury, which when rocked in the sunlight, produced a myriad of reflections on the wall. And perhaps even more important, the Muslims also filled their libraries with many thousands of books on science and philosophy, including works by the ancient Greeks that had been lost in Western Europe after the fall of Rome. The largest library in Cordoba contained roughly 400,000 books, while the largest Christian libraries at the time had only 400 books max. Life for Jews and Christians under Muslim occupation was also mixed. On the one hand, they were clearly second-class citizens. They had less legal standing, and they were not allowed to practice their faith in public. Yet at the same time, they also had the opportunity to thrive economically, and some even occupied positions of power, sometimes even as viziers to caliphs. Because of the advances of Arabic culture, many Christians also became culturally Arabized, preferring Arabic over Latin, as some Christian writers complained about. In fact, a Christian theologian at the time said, "They gather immense libraries at great expense. They despise the Christian literature as unworthy of attention. They have forgotten their own language." And now, join me on a nuanced study of this tumultuous but exhilarating time. Let's start. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. You'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. So go check it out for yourself. Let's start. In the previous lecture, we have discussed the invasion of Spain in 711 by the Muslim Umayyad dynasty. After the invasion, Spain became a province of the Umayyad Caliphate, but this was about to change. In 750, As-Safa, the leader of the new Abbasid Caliphate, killed the Umayyad royal family in their capital Damascus. Only Abd al-Rahman I managed to escape, and he fled to Spain. And once there, he defeated the local emir, that is the provincial governor of Spain, just outside of Cordoba. Once in charge, Al-Rahman demolished the Basilica of Saint Vincent of Cordoba, and then used its building materials to create the Mosque of Cordoba, which is a beautiful construction. And according to the Muslim historian Al-Razi, Al-Rahman also, quote, burned their beautiful churches. And we continue, seeing this, the Christians, when they could, would take their sacred things and would flee to the mountains. And in fact, we have found some votive crowns from this period, which were in fact buried for safekeeping, confirming this account. Al-Rahman I also built himself an estate called the Rusafa, named after his family estate back in Damascus, where his family had been killed. And this estate also included a botanical garden. and there he wrote an ode to a palm tree, which was about an imported palm tree in his garden. For palm trees aren't native to Spain. It is a beautiful poem. We read, "A palm tree stands in the middle of Rusafa, born in the west, far from the land of palms. And I said to it, how like me you are, far away and in exile." Under Al-Rahman I, the economy of Spain also started to pick up, and this accelerated into a genuine economic boom in the 10th century. In fact, the Muslims created a true golden age, both in Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasids, and also in Spain, centered around Cordoba, from which Europe greatly benefited, as we shall see. First of all, the Muslims brought to Europe a whole host of new products and inventions. For instance, they introduced new crops, including rice, hard wheat, sorghum, sugarcane, cotton, watermelons, limes, lemons, oranges, bananas, pomegranates, spinach, artichoke, and aubergine. The Muslims also greatly improved irrigation systems, including the use of water wheels with buckets to raise water, vastly improving agricultural produce. And with much more food available, the population grew, allowing more people to invest in crafts, trade, and learning. The Muslims also updated high culture, for instance by introducing new styles of music. And this is quite remarkable as instrumental music was forbidden by Islam. Yet this didn't stop the elites as usual. And by the way, they also consumed alcohol and played chess, which was also against the rules. Under the rule of Al-Rahman II, a famous Persian musician named Ziryab was also brought to court. And when the treasurers refused to pay the musician for his services for religious reasons, Al-Rahman II simply paid him out of his own pocket. Interestingly, Ziryab didn't just bring the latest trends in music from Baghdad to Cordoba. He also taught new ways to cook, new etiquettes on how to serve dinner, new hairstyles, new clothing styles, and he also introduced the use of toothpaste. The most influential descendant of Al-Rahman I was Al-Rahman III. During his incredibly long, 50-year-long reign, in the 10th century, Islamic Spain reached the peak of its power and wealth. Interestingly, Al-Rahman's grandmother on his father's side was the Christian princess Onaka, who was the daughter of the king of Navarre, and who had been sent to Cordoba as a hostage in the 860s. And on top of this, Al-Rahman's mother was a Christian concubine slave named Musna. This made Al-Rahman III only 25% Arab, and in fact he had blue eyes, light skin and reddish hair, which by the way he dyed black to appear more Arabic. And he certainly wasn't the only one, for the Arab leaders often preferred European sex slaves, especially those with blonde or red hair. Hisham I, for instance, had white skin and reddish hair. Muhammad I of Cordoba had a pinkish face, and Abd Allah of Cordoba had white skin, blue eyes and blonde hair. And Hisham II was blonde with blue eyes and a reddish beard. And he was estimated to be only 0.09% Arabic, and the list goes on. Al-Rahman III was also the first Muslim leader of Spain to explicitly claim its independence. In theory, there can be only one ruler of the Islamic world, the so-called Khalifa or successor of the Prophet, which at the time was the Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. To not break with this tradition, the Umayyad rulers in Spain had assumed the title of Emir or provincial governor, although they were de facto independent. Yet in 929 AD, Al-Rahman III was confident enough to declare Spain the Caliphate of Cordoba, proclaiming himself as Caliph, meaning the true ruler of all Muslims. And by the way, Al-Rahman III wasn't the first to do this. In 909, a breakaway group of Shiites, the descendants of Ali, led by an imam who claimed to be a descendant of Fatima, the daughter of Muhammad and the husband of Ali, also proclaimed a caliphate, and they came to be known as the Fatimids, after Fatima, and they were centered first in Tunisia and later in Egypt. Now let's zoom in on Cordoba, the capital of the caliphate. During the reign of Al-Rahman III and his immediate successors, Cordoba reached a population of about 100,000 inhabitants, several times bigger than the largest cities in Western Europe. The urban nucleus of Cordoba was the Roman city of Cordoba, which was surrounded by walls of stone with 7 gateways, and also a Roman bridge which still stands today. In the 10th century, it was said that there were 900 baths with running water from aqueducts, and also thousands of shops, hundreds of mosques, and also paved and well-lit streets. In 936, Al-Rahman built himself a huge palace just outside of Cordoba, called Madinat al-Zahra. We read that 10,000 workmen were needed to build this site. And in the famous Hall of Caliphs, the roofs and walls were covered with tinted marble, which was so fine, we read, that it was translucent. And in the center was placed a large shallow bowl with mercury on a base that could be rocked, and the caliph would ask a slave to rock the bowl once in a while, creating a myriad of reflections of sunlight on the walls. And the reception hall, so we read, had a gold and silver roof with a giant pearl hanging from its center. Once it was finished, the palace terrain housed 3,750 slaves. It had a menagerie, an aviary, a fish pond, and also a zoo with exotic animals. And it contained mosques, baths, a garden with statues of animals and humans, merchants' quarters, and also the administrative center of the caliphate. 10th century Cordoba was also home to 70 libraries. And this included the library built by Al-Rahman's son, Hakim II, which became one of the greatest libraries in the world. It employed 70 copyists just to make copies of the Quran. It is said that the library contained 400,000 books in total, and the catalogue of books alone ran 44 volumes of 50 pages each. While in comparison, the largest Christian library had probably only around 400 books max. The secret to creating this number of books was papermaking, a technology which was developed in China and imported by the Arabs. For paper is much cheaper to produce compared to parchment, which was used in Europe. For this is made of animal skin. Now let's take a moment to discuss what life was like under Muslim rule in Spain. Since the Romantic era of the 19th century, the West has generally painted an overly utopic vision of Islamic Spain. They spoke of convivencia, or living together, referring to the perceived peaceful coexistence between Jews, Christians and Muslims at the time. And although overly optimistic, this idea is not entirely without merit. Some talented Jews and Christians were able to reach high positions in the Islamic government. For instance, in the 10th century, Caliph Al-Rahman III had a Jewish vizier and physician named Hasdai ibn Shaprut, who also acted as a powerful foreign secretary to the caliph. And in the 11th century, the Jew Samuel ibn Nagriya became the first minister of the Principality of Granada. He even became the commander of troops. He ran the state, while at the same time he was rabbi and scholar. His son Joseph succeeded him in this position, although he was killed in an anti-Semitic pogrom. So clearly there were ups and downs for the Jews in Spain. The Christian Recomendus, Bishop of Elvira, also served as an esteemed diplomat at the court of Al-Rahman III. In 949 he was sent on a diplomatic mission to Constantinople, and in 955 to the court of Otto I in Germany. It is also laudable that Jews and Christians weren't forced to convert to Islam, and in fact forced conversion is prohibited by the Quran. Yet there were also downsides to life under Islamic rule. Firstly, Christians and Jews were forbidden to practice their religion in public, even in their own neighborhoods. Crosses could not be displayed on the body and also not on the top of churches, and church bells also could not be rung. Some laws were also clearly discriminatory against Christians and Jews. Compensation for injury or death, for instance, for Christians, was half the amount paid out to Muslims. And the testimony of Christians and Jews was not valid in disputes between Muslims. And also, if a Muslim was murdered, the perpetrator received the death penalty, but this was not the case when a Christian was murdered. And there were also some strange purity laws. For instance, a Muslim was not allowed to eat food or drink water left by a Christian. Non-Muslims were also forced to pay an extra tax called the jizya, and employment was also generally easier for Muslims. So clearly Jews and Christians were second-class citizens in Islamic Spain. And although they were never forced to convert, these rules did put some social pressure on them to become Muslim. It just made life easier. And indeed, the Christian population steeply declined over the centuries. Another indirect conversion method was the law that a Muslim man was allowed to marry a Christian woman, but their children had to be Muslim. But a Christian man who married a Muslim woman had to be killed. And this funneled all intermarriages and offspring in favor of Islam. On top of this, conversions in the other direction were forbidden. You weren't allowed to convert from Islam to Christianity, for instance. Muslims who secretly practiced another religion were killed without an opportunity to repent. And open apostates were given a chance to return to Islam. Yet if they refused or reoffended, they too were killed. We can get a rough estimate of conversions from the Muslim records. As time went by, more and more Islamized Visigothic names appeared in these records, such as Thutmir for Theodemir or Rudruk for Roderick. And from this we find that about 8% of the indigenous population was Muslim by the year 800, about 25% by 900, and a stunning 75% of the population by the year 1000. Yet, it has to be said, many Christians also saw the positives of Arabic culture. In fact, many Christians, known as the Mozarabs, became culturally Arabized. And in 9th century Cordoba, Paul Alvarez even complained that the young Christians could not write a single letter in Latin. He wrote, "The Christians love to read the poems and romances of the Arabs. They study the Arab theologians and philosophers, not to refute them, but to form a correct and elegant Arabic. Where is the layman who now reads the Latin commentaries on the Holy Scriptures? Or who studies the Gospels, prophets or apostles? Alas! All talented young Christians read and study with enthusiasm the Arab books. They gather immense libraries at great expense. They despise the Christian literature as unworthy of attention. And they have forgotten their own language. For everyone who can write a letter in Latin to a friend, there are thousands who can express themselves in Arabic with elegance and write better poems in this language than the Arabs themselves." And Alvarez, by the way, was one of the few who still resisted Islam. In his work, he openly attacks the traitors, as he calls them, among the Christian clergy, who worked with Muslim authorities and who believed in coexistence. Between 851 and 859, nearly 50 Christians were martyred when they proclaimed their belief in the divinity of Jesus and the falseness of the Prophet of Islam. And their deaths were described in vivid detail by monk Eulogius, who was himself martyred in 859. Interestingly, these martyrs were not seen as heroes by all Christians at the time. In fact, they were sometimes seen as extremists. For the critics of Islam themselves tell us that some Christians rejected the movement, since these martyrs went out of their way to provoke the Muslim authorities. And there we have it, a description of the Caliphate of Cordoba. In the next lecture, we'll study the fall of the Spanish Caliphate and the Christian reconquista or reconquest of Spain. And we'll also study the Christian scholar Gerard of Cremona, who came to reconquered Toledo to, quote, learn from the Arab masters, studying the great Arabic books in their libraries. But for now, if you want to know more about Islamic history or any other topic from world history, then read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can read it completely for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.